Metaphysica Morum by Thomas Ligotti. My instructions were to follow a sequence of absurdly simple acts, and to keep the operation secret. First, I was to make my way into the assigned environment. Second, I would depart in the most natural manner, undetected if possible, though that part was not essential. Such was the basic framework of the dream. Nevertheless, my sense was that the orders I was carrying out would have repercussions in a far greater scheme. While feelings of this kind often inhere in night visions, their quality on this occasion seemed of a nature surpassing anything I had previously experienced in the world of sleep. The role I was to play was that of a common individual on a shopping mission, words that suggested to me the most sinister fusion of the banal and the remarkable. I was already in character when someone approached me. The dealer, as I thought of him, to accommodate my pretended purpose. His place of business, that chain of galaxies showroom, impressed me as having been synthesized in a rented bathtub, as my mind conceived it. At the same time, this was not an unfamiliar environment to me. Once again, I quivered at a representation of the outlandish and the everyday. It was in some way an analogue of the world I desperately wanted to exit by suicide in my waking life, ideally by the administration of an anesthetic, the most benign form of euthanasia. In a momentary flash of lucidity, I even came to the realization that such a procedure was then unsanctioned in both the material realm as well as the most distant frontiers to which I had been directed in dreams. The dealer was a lanky specimen who was nearly twice my height. He seemed about to break at the waist as he bent toward me. For what seemed the 10th time, he said, "If I understand you correctly, sir, you are in the market for an all-new context." "I shouldn't be able to see so far," I said. I meant the dimensions of the dream. There seemed no limit to what my sight beheld. Grotesque patterns were in movement, seemingly light years from where I stood. "You are a metaphysical mutant, if I'm not mistaken. Not even a generation from the swamplands. Fertile soil for aberrations of all types." I now felt a connection to some awful genesis, something transmitting forces of harm to the nucleus of my being. "And you've been seeking my services for some time." Much more was said, words spoken to me in an unknown language, yet one I understood as relating to schemes of immense repercussions. And there were other things that were not said, but still related all the same, as if my mind were communing with itself. There were instructions of intent, infinitely complex processes and principles at work, manifestations that were singular and manifold at once, particular and universal, arbitrary and absolute, all of which were correlated in ways both infinitesimal and immeasurable within my nature, as is common in dreams of affairs beyond sensible conception, which I had experienced all my life, and over the years refined into the formulations here articulated. I was overwhelmed by an uncanny dread, and thereby phased out of sleep. Now, by this time of my life, I usually awoke from such a dream in a state of agitated annoyance, both with the deranged experience I had just undergone and with my ranking as a defective human being, which is to say, a human being as such. As a dreaming organism, I had long ago abandoned obsessing over scenarios and details of a symbolic standing, tediously auditing that which I allowed to be sucked down the drain of all psychological point or meaning within seconds of my regaining consciousness of the waking world. And, as I have noted, the world itself seemed to me no better than a landscape synthesized in a rented bathtub, onirically speaking. But on this dream occasion, as I will refer to these excursions henceforth, the words "all new context" stayed with me, and did not disappear into the black hole of my careless memory. I brought this phrase to the next session I had scheduled with my therapist cum meditation instructor, who hung his shingle outside an old storefront. His name was Dr. Olin. However, with his familiars and clients, he preferred to be addressed as Dr. O. This personal designation also appeared on his business cards as if it were some kind of alias. The simple O, he once explained to me, was not a declaration of negativism, as I once hoped, but one of openness to interpretation and non-sectarianism. I found this affectation nauseating, but at the same time I wrote it off as part of the whole package that was Dr. O. His gentle yet commanding manner, his projection of a superior erudition, and, despite his shabby place of business, his clearly expensive yet tasteful attire and fastidiously groomed person. Furthermore, I was not in a position to shop around for the help I needed to get me from one day to another. And the only reason I needed such help was that what I really wanted, to be euthanized by anesthesia, was not available to me in the barbaric society to which I belonged. While Dr. O was capable of assisting me in my true desire, I was not so unhinged or unreasonable as to expect his compliance. In fact, he would not even allow me to speak of it, due to his expansive acceptance of an objective moral order of the universe. "An all-new context?" repeated Dr. O, when I told him of my dream occasion. "Interesting. Why is it interesting? I asked. Well, for one thing, it's so open to exegesis. This reaction in no way took me aback. As I have suggested, Dr. O was so blatantly, so ostentatiously open to delightful possibilities and interpretations that nothing really meant anything, or not much, in whatever context he spoke at a given time. For this reason, I often felt like murdering him. However, the intensity of my demoralized state of emotion left me with nowhere else to go, since I had been rejected by every other psychotherapist to whom I previously appealed. And having somewhere to go was at this point all I had going for me, that is, until I went for good, preferably via euthanasia by painless anesthetic. Nevertheless, I must admit that I still felt, at some level, a totally idiotic need to exhaust every speck of interest left in me being alive. Consequently, I was drawn in by Dr. O's use of the word interesting. Of course, he knew that this is how I would react, just as I knew how he would react. The whole pitiful drama between us was such that there were no surprises, or none that indicated any progress in my condition. There were only confirmations that everything was just what it seemed. Birth, the business of living, and death. This was simple enough for most, but quite intolerable for a moral and sometimes even a phenomenal nihilist like me. Claiming that he found the phrase "an all-new context" to be interesting was a sort of empty compliment, though I could not prove it, or I might have saved myself much time and expense. After all, it was not as if I needed Dr. O to perform emergency surgery on my body, just to tinker enough with my brain to keep me from going to ruin in a purely psychic context. And what therapist or meditation guru does not use flattery as a tool of leverage when dealing with his clientele? No one who seeks the attention of either type of healer, let alone one who is both, wants to be seen as just another face in the crowd. If one is defective, as are we all in some way, being uniquely defective is something of a consolation in the absence of a cure. All the same, my resentment of Dr. O was based primarily on his prestige as an authority figure, one who, by virtue of his specialized learning, could lord it over anyone willing to pay in order to benefit from what he knew, or pretended to know. This attitude toward authority figures applied with special vehemence to those who conveyed, though they may not explicitly declare as much, the condition of being saved, that is, of having no need to fret over the plight of human existence. While there is nothing inherently contemptible about the saved, I nonetheless could not help but scorn them. One might say that this was the result of my envy of persons who did not suffer from the defects, or at least the same defects that I did. To my mind, though, I despised the saved for what I saw as their sense of contentment with the order of being in its physical essence, its psychological essence, and not unusually in a metaphysical essence that they contended to experience, so boundless they could be in their outright assertions of directly apprehending all reality. The whole business of a therapist's or guru's occupation was, in my view, tantamount to a swindle. There is no necessary or sufficient reason to possess or feign to possess a sense of salvation in light of the pain of existence. But because I was taking a chance that Dr. O might do me some good, I had to go along with his being saved, even if it was all an act to cover up the unavoidable harm that awaits us all. As a physician of mine once said in a rare moment of candor, everybody ends up badly. At best, it's only the luck of 1 in a million if you don't see it coming. I should know. It's my business. Afterward, he charged me a considerable sum for an emergency surgery. Such episodes have been a running theme in my life since my earliest days. You could attribute my psychological instability to this fact, as well as to the dream occasions that so suspiciously bled into my quotidian life that sometimes I could not tell the one from the other, which, hypothetically, might be attributed to there being no actual distinction between them. On top of all the above-mentioned ordeals concerning my presence in the world, my therapist guru took liberties that I resented. One of these liberties that aggrieved me also intimated and suggested to me Dr. O's true identity as nothing but a swindler was the following. He was always moving around the city to take advantage of rental rates and lowered property taxes attaching to the places that had become undesirable due to criminal activities and other forms of urban degeneration. Dr. O once explained this strategy to me when I complained about coming to see him in a warehouse hovel by the city's docks, a venue that attracted an array of unlawful enterprises. An indifference to one's surroundings, Dr. O intoned, is basic to any psychological or spiritual advancement. The enlightened one himself relocated from a palace to a life of uncertainty and hardship on the open road, not the other way around. What authenticity was contained in Dr. O's excuse for his deteriorating professional locales, I could not tell. How else could he explain his questionable migrations, that he was perpetually on the run from creditors as a consequence of some illegal activity on his part? Even if I suggested such a possibility, he would only have recast this accusation to conform to his public image as an elevated being who was well worth the discount rates that he charged. Naturally, an excuse of this kind would just exacerbate my scorn for the saved and their smug sense of how perfectly right things were in the universe, while at the same time highlighting my impotence to challenge their claim. This inability of mine to impugn their felicitous vision of themselves and everything else only bolstered his point. Whatever he was, Dr. O was a creature who could flourish in the worst conditions, if only until his day finally came, and this gift went a long way toward confirming his authority to direct the lives of defective persons such as myself. For me, the consequence of being out of work, which was both a cause for and result of my turning to the services of Dr. O, led me to overlook that his base of operations was situated in what was known as the battleground district. I was on my last legs when I saw Dr. O's advertisement in the classified section of a local publication I found abandoned in the booth of one of the cheap diners where I was taking my meals at the time, and thereafter, if truth be told, to an emotional wreck, the words "fair rates," which were featured in the classified ad, were good enough reason to overlook a great deal on the side of safety with respect to the battleground district. For a time, Dr. O even took me in when I was at my lowest point. He also treated me on an installment plan once I revealed my financial documentation of my embarrassed circumstances. "You'll find something soon enough," he told me. "I'm sure of it." As it happened, the reason Dr. O could be sure of my finding gainful work was that he referred me to a variety of temporary services with which he was associated, arranging for them to hand over my wages directly to his keeping. In turn, his therapeutic treatment of me began, following soon after by a more ambitious program of guided meditation. At this juncture, the average individual might doubt my intelligence in agreeing to Dr. O's stipulations regarding my work life. But my intelligence was by no means at issue during this time in my life. Instead, the behavior I manifested was entirely dictated by my state of demoralization. In fact, the whole of my existence had been critically demoralized for one reason or another. From my earliest days I was unwell with more than my share of childhood diseases. Of course, there may be people who have had a diseased childhood without having had a bad childhood. But good, bad, or indifferent, my diseased childhood seems in retrospect to have laid the foundation of my subsequent years, which, as I am with difficulty trying to depict, had been years of severe demoralization. To pursue this subject from another angle, it is not necessarily true that a diseased physical life is the cause of a diseased mental life. Such calculations of cause and effect are too simplistic. More probable is that a diseased physical life may be the cause of an active, meaning overly active, mental life, a life in which mental phenomena predominate and may even seem to have objective form. As everyone learns who has been attentive to their own thoughts, what manifests in one's brain is often directly traceable to what is happening in some other part of one's body. And if a disease is happening in some part of one's body, or in the whole of one's body, as occurred during my childhood, then you can be sure of having an overly active mental life, even to the extent, as I have said, of perceiving mental phenomena as equally real, or more so, than physical phenomena. When the rest of your body is lying inactive because of an illness or thrashing with fever, and the dream occasions of fever, your brain is left to compensate for this inactivity by overactivity. It only makes sense. In the end, what I am attempting to communicate is this. My childhood disease made me a thoughtful person, overly so, and too much thinking leads to clinical demoralization, which must be abundantly evident from the previous few thousand words I have written. And therein is the reason that I acceded to Dr. O's overseeing of my work life and control of my finances. In addition, our arrangement enabled me to afford the modest rates he charged for my therapy and meditational instruction, and at the same time allowed me to live a somewhat decent life in a one-bedroom apartment. In that place, I was harassed by disturbing dream occasions each night, including dream occasions about the dealer who saw that I was in the market for an all-new context. The dream occasion that Dr. O said was merely interesting because it was so open to exegesis concerning what I must admit was my diseased mental life. What I did mention to Dr. O was the dealer's characterization of me as a metaphysical mutant. Here would be an apt place to explain some things about my upbringing and, more strikingly, my heredity. I was raised in various foster homes, a cast-off infant found in a bus station lavatory, who subsequently became part of the government's child services system. For most of my life, though, I never had a hint of my genealogy. Not that I had any reason to be excessively curious. I had my interests, but the identity of my begetters wasn't one of them. Actually, it seemed something of a vulgar topic to my way of thinking. Then, one day, soon after I had to leave my long-time position at a publishing firm because of my debilitating mental state, and prior to my becoming a client of Dr. O, I received a letter with no return address. It was postmarked somewhere in the southern region of the country, specifically a region that might have been within the swamplands that the dealer mentioned in the dream occasion at the opening of this autobiographical confession or complaint. Since leaving my job, moving in with Dr. O for a time, and then relocating to a one-bedroom apartment, I have lost all but a few pages of the letter and the envelope in which it was contained. For a time, I thought the letter was a ruse of some kind, especially given the integration of articulate learnedness and plain idiocy within it. But later, it began to take on a meaning when incorporated with the whole of my biography. In my effort to explain something of my origins and heredity, and perhaps suggest other qualities of my life and character, I will transcribe those pages below, somewhat edited for clarity. So, as I was spraying, cousin, you see, geez, sometimes I crack myself up. We orphaned you without meaning anything by it, left you behind in that bus station toilet. Nothing personal, we just forgot having such a big family and all. We had all gone to town to see one of them horror movies where northern folks get massacred by backwoods hick-sewing bread, as I should know, that their females can reproduce by what you call parthenogenesis. No joke. While the males sodomize farm animals and unfortunate Yankees who stray onto their property. Southern pride notwithstanding, we love them pictures about swamp-dwelling murderin' crackers by my granddaddy's crusty asshole, we do. Never seen a roll of toilet paper in his miserable life. Not that we're much better off. Damn, if we ain't shotgun shack poor. Why, just the other week, me and Clem, my half-ass brother, got the other half bit off by a gator, had to bear trap a couple of tourists, wandered into the swamp, probably sightseeing or whatnot, to get some money so's we could keep the electricity on. Otherwise, we might fall down the hole in our parlor room where we shit and piss and other things snicker. Yankees they was, of course. Screamed like coons on the fire, yes they did, before Clem put 'em out of their misery by blasting their brains with Daddy's old rifle, what once went off whilst our cousin Sire was picking his nose with the barrel end of it. Clem's got the gift of doing business with the police. He's got other gifts too, like being able to draw you into his dreams. Sometimes you don't even know you're in there until a zombie or such like comes after you, or the planets start moving in funny ways. But shooting's his specialty. Even if he ain't got no more than 2 fingers, the other 8 being bit off by a dear mother in the fires of holy passion, whilst they was at the business of making 3 of our half-brothers, 2 sisters, sundry half-and-halves as we call 'em, and them that such live in the cellar. Don't rightly know how to go about describing them or how they got that way. Sometimes they send up vibrations like they was angered, though mostly they leave the rest of us be. All the family freaks considered, though, there's not a fag among us, even if sometimes it can be difficult to say when we's all in the dark, which is most nights. Our troubled standing with the state power system being what it is, and because there ain't just enough tourist gold, as Clem likes to say, to keep the lights on as much as we'd like. We can make fire with our eyes sometimes, but no one's ever got rich doing that, at least that I know. Which puts me in the minds of those redskins used to live back here in the swamp before they got themselves plumb flush with them casinos. Seems a white man can hardly get his due in this shun-don't-shine state. God bless the Confederate dead, and them of us who's among them with our good Lord, including my little sister, sent up by heaven by our daddy's squirrel stick of a rifle went off when he was having his way with her. Don't know the thing was loaded no more than he did. He was digging for that nostril meat he loved more than the family dog's hind parts. Blowed his head so far off it went straight through the roof of our home and outhouse, which weren't no loss. The rest of him putting in Sunday dinners for a week. Waste not, want not. Fried in a pan of possum fat, and we got us a face. Would have been the envy of the neighbors if Clem hadn't gotten to them in some years past. Sucked them into one of his dreams and left them there for zombies. Probably. We'd never been on good terms with those folk anyway. It was them or us. Sometimes we get mad at Clem for disappearing walking food when we're half-starved. Meat's meat, and a man's gotta eat, like the cannibal guy says in that movie we went to see, back when we left you in the bus station shitter. He planted 'em in the ground up to their head, fed 'em till they was fat, and harvested 'em like turnips. He didn't have a Jew's chance in a Baptist pitch tent of worship. We tried to do much the same with a tourist fella call himself an anthropologist. He made for good company for a time, though, till he finally got us all agitated with his funny talk. He was yakking a blue streak whilst Clem and I was conferring on whether to use the axe to split him up down the middle, or fillet his pacey skin with the hunting knife and use his hide to fix up a roof, where Daddy's head went through. That anthropologist fella kind of sounded like the guy that gave me your address. Name of a dealer. Odd type he was, and not to be trifled with. Even Clem felt a queer horror of the man. Seemed to blink in and out of existence before your eyes as you was talking to him. Called us metaphysical mutants. At least, I think those were his words. Anyway, he conveyed that you might appreciate a holler from your kin folks. Sorry again how things turned out. Hope you don't. So ended what remained of the letter. I think the reader can appreciate from it not only something of my origins and heredity, but also the uncanny reference to the dealer. Still a figure of my dream occasions at the time, but one that now filled my mind with a chilling perplexity, particularly with respect to mental phenomena transposed within a physical universe. This feeling was greatly deepened in the next session I had with Dr. O. I mentioned that I continued to have dreams of the dealer, in at least one of which Dr. O's name arose in a context I could not recall. Instantly, my therapist and guru went pale. He was also quite obviously at pains to force out his next sentence. Did the dealer say anything about an all-new context? I believe so, I said. He almost always does. At these words, Dr. O visibly shuddered, and the file on me that was on his lap nearly fell to the floor. He recovered the folder, however, and hastily wrote something before straightening its pages and securing it in a metal drawer. We then moved on to my meditation instruction, employing a new technique that was supposed to be more effective in quelling my incessant cognition, and in turn lightening my demoralized state as a human being. Like most human beings, had no focused idea of what it meant to exist in the world, but had to get on with things in any case, whether demoralized or, ideally, in a more or less complacent manner. Roughly speaking, these are the only two ways one can exist, whatever context in the universe, and whatever destiny has dealt you within that context, as I later came to understand more profoundly. Actively seeking an all-new context was, of course, quite another matter, and quite an unusual one. Following my meditation practice that day, Dr. O sent me packing. That is how I thought of his manner toward me as I reflected upon it later that day. Dr. O sent me packing, I said aloud while standing at the kitchen sink in my one-bedroom apartment. He was practically pushing me out the door as I was asking him if he would rather I did not speak of the dealer in future sessions. In a haughty tone, he said that whatever I determined to speak of or not speak of in our sessions was entirely my decision. Once outside, I heard the door behind me slammed shut and locked. Despite Dr. O's seeming dismissal of our discussion regarding the dealer, as well as the business of an all-new context, I continued to have dream occasions in which both played a central role. One of them took place in a setting I had often frequented in my dreaming life. I viewed this visionary environment much the same as I did the dealer's Chain of Galaxies showroom, which is to say that it seemed to me an analog of the waking world, however superficially at odds they appeared. In these dreams, I would always be in what I can only describe as a multi-level bazaar, a marketplace without borders that was filled with what seemed an infinite number of crumbling structures of all shapes, many of them with odd, unnameable objects arranged behind warped window panes, contorted blobs, and twisted figurines contrived and aligned to forbidding effect. And everywhere there were carts with grotesque merchandise dangling from canopies with leathery appearance, a dried and cracked material that I knew to be human flesh. Both above and below me were dark expanses of jagged stairways and corridors, fragile walkways between tilting towers, and undulating ramps that spiraled down into shadowy depths and upwards into shadowy heights. It was on one of these ramps, high above me, that I spied the dealer, who called my name in a reverberant voice. I moved toward him, but realized with frustration that I had no idea how he could be reached. Then, suddenly, I was standing before him. He started walking away from me, gesturing over his shoulder for me to follow, yelling over the din around us. "I got this place cheap, much better than my old one, don't you think?" I had to agree with him, if only because the shambles around us was just a pile of my own dream manifestations. On that occasion, I had a fixed awareness that I was dreaming, which has its benefits and drawbacks depending on how much control I can exert over my surroundings. In the next instant, the dealer and I were sitting on crates across from each other in what appeared to be a storage room for a manufacturing plant of some kind. "So," the dealer began, "your all-new context. Should we proceed?" I can't answer to a mystery. And would my answer make any difference? "Not really," he said, "but I don't believe you will object to what is on order." It shouldn't matter whether I object or not. I'm lucid at the moment, if you haven't noticed. "Nevertheless, you could lose control just like that," said the dealer, snapping his fingers. I knew he was right, so I refrained from making a fuss. The last thing I wanted was to find myself crawling through an ever-narrowing tunnel with some monstrosity at my heels. "However," the dealer continued, "I absolutely know you will not object." "I object to all things but one: euthanasia by anesthetic. You know that, among other things about me." "Yeah, not even a generation from the swamplands where you and yours fermented into the metaphysical mutants you are. But you are more advanced than they, and you have followed all instructions to the letter." "In your dreams, I have." "Actually, they're your dreams. But why split hairs?" "What about my all-new context?" "Well, it's not all that new. If you haven't noticed, things have been trending in a certain direction in that other world, so to speak. I'm a demoralized metaphysical mutant. You don't have to tell me." "I guess there's some satisfaction in being right. I'm just the dealer, so what do I know?" "I don't want to be right. I want to be dead." "You're guaranteed that. But I know what you're saying." "So?" "Ask Dr. O the next time you see him. He'll fix you up. The world needs metaphysical mutants like you to get where it's going." "And where is it going?" "Ask Dr. O. He'll fix you up." "And where is it going?" "He'll fix you up." That was it. I lost all control of my lucid dream occasion and awoke with the dealer's mechanistically repeated phrase about being fixed up resonating in my mind. And the word demoralization was laid bare as the euphemism it was for the spectrum of astonishing harm our species had ever endured, and its trending in a certain direction all the more strange and excruciating. Such as it was with our individual lives from their initiation to their end, so it was with a universal process of disintegration and derangement. As above, so below, and as below, so above. There was magic in things, after all, or so it seemed. A metaphysical ideal of the immaterial devolved into appearances. What mockery that I should be a part of this movement, a mutant designated to mutilate further the wreckage of the cosmos. Nevertheless, while all signs indicated the substance of what I had experienced, the real still remained as good as a guess. It always has. Yet the nightmare obtains, sure, and sometimes may be shared. Hours later, I was still possessed by the blackest demoralization I had ever known. As the sun rose that day, its harsh light glaring upon the cityscape beyond my apartment window, I wanted nothing more than to meet with Dr. O. Why I desired this meeting was past my understanding. He had done little or nothing so far to help me, aside from arranging for me to work at temporary jobs for which I was completely unsuited. But he was familiar with my dream occasions featuring the dealer. This fact made him the only person with whom I could share the demoralization I now felt, due to my latest encounter with this figure. Of course, in the most recent session, during which I mentioned the dealer and my dreams about him, Dr. O dismissed the matter. But he also sent me packing, and he failed to notify me of his new address, which I found was a walk-up above an old house that was inconveniently situated close to some railroad tracks, where the noise and vibrations of passing trains were a regular occurrence. Thus, I could only conclude that Dr. O wanted to be rid of me as a client, which was no great revelation. For my part, the only reason I made it my business to find him time and time again was my need for a means to live in my one-bedroom apartment. But now I wanted nothing more than to avail myself of Dr. O's mental health services. Because Dr. O had not provided me with any way otherwise to contact him, I was forced to show up at his office without scheduling an appointment ahead of time. Nevertheless, he politely, though not enthusiastically, said that he could make some time for me before his next client arrived. When I stepped inside his office, which was actually just a small and sparely furnished room, I was shocked to see that the place looked as if it had not been cleaned for some time. Similarly, Dr. O was slovenly dressed and conspicuously ill-groomed, his signature natty appearance nowhere in evidence. I could not pretend that his transformation had escaped my notice. "I've been ill. Please have a seat," he said, waving a limp hand toward one of the chairs in the room. Dr. O settled himself on a sofa, but did not sit in his usual cross-legged posture. "What brings you here?" I told him about my dream occasion with the dealer and my subsequent state of demoralization. Considering his previous dismissal of the subject, I suppose I should not have been surprised that he ignored everything I said. Instead, he seemed to sink deep into himself. Then he started up with his usual therapeutic and spiritual hogwash. The homily he delivered was an apologetics for pain in the world, a mouthful of emptiness that he seemed to have adopted specifically for me as a demoralized wretch and potential suicide. He said something about the diversity of sensations that we might call good or bad, though in reality they were more akin to musical tones that collectively produced a cosmic work of music. Already I was growing impatient with this hackneyed metaphor that I supposed was Dr. O's attempt to portray disease and agony in human life as no more than grace notes in the ultimate harmony of existence. It was all just so much rationalization, of course. But his words did not contain the usual force and refinement Dr. O customarily mustered. Indeed, he spoke in an embarrassingly diffident and awkward manner. He actually stuttered while talking of humanity's cries of misery and the yowls of ecstasy, the whole racket of the world, all of which fused into some kind of magnificent symphony. And as he gesticulated all over the place as if he were swatting away a swarm of flying insects attacking him, finally he fell silent at the obviously tired and borrowed nature of his Dharma speech, as he might have styled it. Then he altered his rhetorical strategy. At first his words were no less tired and borrowed than before. Although he was no longer gesticulating, he continued somewhat awkwardly, more haltingly, I would say, in the transmission of his message. "Stop!" I shouted. "Just admit it. You're a fraud." Dr. O smiled sadly. "It took you all this time to notice that? Usually, I'm spotted for what I am after 3 sessions, 6 at the most. But you let me run your whole life. It just got to be too much, even for me." "That's why you started moving around? So I couldn't find you? Come on." "Okay, so you're not as stupid as I thought you were." "You always knew what I wanted. I thought if I waited long enough, you'd oblige a long-time client. I knew you had the resources. That's why you were avoiding me." He fell silent and just stared into my eyes. "At first, that was the reason. I didn't want to do it. You know, morals and such. And you really were beyond saving. Demoralization was your word, but I knew it was something far more pathological than that. At one point, I thought I might be able to do something for you. Then I came to my senses. It was that dealer business." "Don't tell me that a few of my dreams put a scare into you." "No, it wasn't then. It was when I saw him sitting on the lid of my toilet seat in my bathroom one morning. He was sort of blinking in and out. I thought you had infected me somehow with your insane dreams. I sidled out of the bathroom without turning around. When I reached the living room, right on that spot just behind you, he was standing there. I seemed to be trapped in a humdrum horror movie. But that's not how it felt. And he said things." "Yeah, he said things all right. Now look at me. I've turned into you." "What did he say?" "When someone's standing in your living room, blinking off and on like a defective light bulb, it shorts out your brain. Unless you're a degenerate swamp dweller, or one of their descendants, a metaphysical mutant." "What?" "Never mind. What did he say?" "All I remember was that he told me things that no one could know. It was as if he plugged his brain into mine and pumped into me everything in the world, everything in the whole universe, and other stuff I can't even explain. First I thought I was going to explode. Then anything that I thought was my life, as I knew it, that I thought was real, just being alive, it all drained out of me until there was nothing left. And then I dropped in a dead faint to the floor. When I came to, he was gone." "And now you've become me," That's how it seems. I'm sorry I didn't listen to what you said to me on all those visits, but I had to keep up appearances. It wouldn't have done any good, you know. You know that now. Sure I do. However I run it through my head, I keep coming up with the same conclusion, the same way out. What about my suggestion, then? It would be elegant. It would be effective. I know. I have what I need. What we need. I was only waiting for you to show up. As you always do. You know, it's really all your fault that I've come to this. You're the fraud. You invited it on yourself. That's how I ended up thinking about it. Funny almost. A small-time fraud stumbling into... I don't even know what to call it. Schemes of immense repercussions. Or demoralization in all its facets and aspects. Terminal demoralization. We're a dime a dozen. I'm going to make it up to you. I know the dealer said you'd fix me up. Olin left the room. It was not long before he returned bearing 2 filled and capped syringes. One of them was placed in a sealed plastic bag, which he handed to me. Rightly assuming I had never intravenously injected myself, he pushed up one of my shirt sleeves. With 2 fingers, he tapped the veins on the inner side of my arm. This one, he said. First, drink a couple glasses of water to raise it up. Then you just slide it in and push the plunger. Can you do that? I'm sure of it. Thank you. I had it now. It was all I ever wanted. When I was back in my 1-bedroom apartment, I sat quiet and motionless in a reupholstered chair, the syringe on the table beside me. There were sounds from outside the walls and windows around me. Cars, people talking, music from an ice cream truck. None of it meant anything. The world was mutating. Its every organism trending toward an ultimate derangement. It was not an all-new context, just the way things had always been. Death was guaranteed, as the dealer put it. Harm was guaranteed. It was not as if what was happening had not been in the works for millennia. I imagined everything I had dreamed as being the truth without question. Maybe something became impatient with earthly evolution. Something that was not good or evil, not moral or immoral, just something that was in motion. It was in front of us all the time, but no one saw it. No one wanted to see it. I found that annoying. I had been demoralized for so long, and all I ever wanted was to get on with the inevitable. Moreover, I wanted to do it in my own good time, and with respect and understanding, not hindered and hated because I was not for this world. Hence, I felt it my moral right, real or ill-real, to leave a suicide note expressing my ire to the unwitting doomed, the ones who, as has ever been their wont, will spurn and decry such a document. Better still, let the following be known as my suicide declaration. Those who contest demoralization as the inexorable way of universal deliverance have failed to see what is before them. They have lagged behind in the evolutionary ideal of our species. That ideal is a beneficial mutation. If nothing else, the demoralized are fortuitous mutants. From the day that marked our kind's awakening to life, such mutants have borne the common task of attaining for the world its true status and to announce its arrival in a time to come. Now it has fallen to demoralized mutants to enunciate their closed-off future. Of all others, they have been assigned with the venture of depressing the inhabitants of the earth so that the horrors of existence may perish by an entropic process of moral deterioration culminating in a psychically pristine posterity. Into their tremulous hands has been passed an urgency to have these horrors die along with the vessels that contain them, and until then to edify those who endorse inaction or a complicity of silence the horrors that flourish in daylight and dark. Any who doubt that the foregoing is truly the case only indict themselves of a willing blindness and depraved ignorance. Those who accept the lines herein are already in good standing with the mutants of a redemptive demoralization. As for those who still practice and profit from horrors, they must be condemned, not because they are wickedly content with dozing in sick dreams, which their benighted state renders them helpless to disjoin themselves, but because they are not on the path of a saving self-mutation. They are obstacles to the future and what it wants. The consummate invention of our species mutants, the future, longs for peace and freedom from suffering, toward which demoralization points the way. That is, it seeks wholeheartedly an eliminative attitude against all manifestations throughout the universe. Such has been the stance of all mutant liberators by demoralization who have ever lived. As one, their voices have spoken of an endpoint to the organic horror. None has ever been fully heard or impeccably followed. They have merely shown the way. This way has always been implicit in their ideal. Closer it draws with the appearance of the demoralized, greater in number and more clear-eyed in purpose. This is the way of the future. All who do not know the way, or who refuse it, will be denied the faintest glimpse of the absolute of an anesthetized future. They are reprobate losers, waiting only to be declared as such by tomorrow's demoralized mutants. So it will be. We are each either among the demoralized, showing the way to a future of eternal nightmare. Or we are losers celebrating our moment in hell.